Regardless of its medicinal value or legality in your particular area, the ceremonial use of cannabis can be a hotly debated topic within the occult sciences. Now, there is a precedence for this, as certain Hindu traditions, particularly those associated with worshiping Shiva, some forms of Tantra, and despite it being controversial, even some Sufi groups, as well as various shaman, medicine men, and ritual healers, have all historically utilized the plant for spiritual purposes. Now, while this doesn't prove its effectiveness, it does demonstrate that this isn't an entirely modern concept. Now, opponents of its use posit that true spiritual development should come from disciplined practice, not intoxicants. They argue that the magician should be able to enter an altered state at will without relying on any external influences. Proponents, however, counter that cannabis is simply another ritual tool and is actually no different in principle from fasting, rhythmic drumming, chanting, sensory deprivation, or any of the other techniques that are widely held as valid methods for entering a mystical state of mind. They contend that what matters most is intention, moderation, and integration, not whether an altered state is achieved through a particular method. Now, the debate goes back and forth, usually focusing on such high-level topics as whether or not it hampers discernment, memory impairment, and if the enhanced pattern recognition often caused by cannabis use is actually a strength or weakness. Now, it should come as no surprise to regular viewers of this channel that I personally think either side of the argument is just as valid as the other. It's like taking a road trip where you have two different route options, each an equally beautiful drive, yet still different. Some folks might prefer Route A, and others might prefer Route B, but in the end, both still lead to the same destination. It's not a matter of right or wrong, but of personal preference and what resonates most strongly with the individual practitioner. In this light, cannabis isn't necessarily sacred, but it can be. On the other side of the coin, it also isn't necessarily detrimental, but again, it can be. Now, I see it as a tool that may be beneficial for some, but its value ultimately depends on the individual themselves and the intention behind its use. What's good for the goose isn't necessarily good for the gander, to use an old adage. On an even more personal level, my own spiritual path does indeed include its use. However, I have certain guidelines I follow when I do choose to utilize it as a tool, which certainly isn't every time. I mainly utilize it when I plan on doing intense energy work or tunneling very deeply into the astral, as I find it makes it easier to enter the initial trance state, helps sharpen my visualizations, and also assists in identifying symbolic or archetypal energy. Now, all that being said, I never use a strain or amount that hasn't been tested outside a ceremonial environment, as I need to know how it will affect me beforehand. Does this particular strain have a deep body high that results in a crash after 30 minutes or so, making me just want to melt into the couch before I've even gotten around to the banishing ritual of the hexagram? Does it creep? What might be an acceptable and useful level in the beginning could potentially grow stronger over time and end up becoming detrimental to my work instead of supplementing it. So that's important information to know. And of course, there are even some strains that can lead to anxiety or paranoia, depending on personal body chemistry. And those certainly aren't feelings you would want to carry into a magical operation with you. Not only would they be distracting, but such feelings would also taint the energies I'm working with, as well as potentially impacting my own discernment. Now, there's also a few safety concerns I feel I should address. Because this affects me, I figure it also affects others, and maybe I can be a bit of help here. Anyone who's watched my Alchemy of Loss videos already knows that I have PTSD, which is actually one of the diagnoses that led to my medical cannabis certification. Besides that certification, however, I also take antidepressants to boost my serotonin. When I'm working with energy and the astral and colors are bleeding into one another like metaphysical aurora borealis, flowing not only around me but also through me, my brain floods my physical body with dopamine, endorphins, and all those other feel-good chemicals in a way that's honestly hard to describe. A lot of people think of sex as the ultimate gratification, as the be-all, end-all of sensory experiences. But in my experience, that's simply not the case. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I don't like sex, far from it. I'm simply using sex here as a recognizable criteria on the pleasure spectrum. Anyhow, what I feel when I'm working with energy or radiating divine light far surpasses those fleeting moments of orgasm. It's far more pervasive and far more sustainable, honestly, sometimes lasting for hours. It's a different type of pleasure sensation, to be sure, that would probably best be described as rapture, but it's still got those neurotransmitters firing like crazy and all those warm and fuzzy hormones surging through my system. Now, besides dopamine surges, other compounds in cannabis, like CBD, interact with serotonin receptors to help calm moods and ease anxiety. At the same time, I'm still being flooded with serotonin, not only from my ethereal work, but also from my antidepressants. And this can actually be a problem. My muscles will get these spasms, usually in my arms or legs, which can lead to waves of shivering. However, it's also accompanied by this state of pretty significant agitation. Now, I used to think of this as getting too high until I was comparing notes with my brother-in-law one day, who experienced the same symptoms, though in a non-spiritual context, and he had done a bit of research. Excuse me again. It turns out what I'd been experiencing was a mild to moderate case of serotonin overload, which can actually be pretty serious at more severe levels. I'm talking life-threatening serious, potentially. I'm not trying to fearmonger here, but it is a medical concern, and it would be completely irresponsible of me to film this episode without discussing it. Now, additional symptoms of severe serotonin toxicity include a high fever that's usually over 101.3 Fahrenheit, which equates to 38.5 Celsius, confusion, disorientation, or perhaps delirium, rapid heart rate, high blood pressure, and even seizures. Excuse me. So if you experience any of these symptoms of severe serotonin toxicity, call emergency services or go to the nearest emergency room immediately. I'm serious here. Don't fuck around. It really is a dangerous condition that you need to be aware of. If, however, you only have mild symptoms, here's what's worked for me. You'll want to stop your energy work and rituals as soon as you notice the onset of symptoms. You'll then want to go lay down in a dark and quiet room, removing as much sensory stimuli as possible, and practice mindful breathing. Now, we don't want to push or pull energies with the breath here, as honestly, that would be counterproductive. We just want to focus our attention on the act of breathing slowly and rhythmically. Now, the muscle spasms and the shivering will come and go. The agitation might trigger fight or flight responses in your body. But just remind yourself that this won't last forever, that the brain chemicals in your body will start to level out. And for now, all we need to be focused on is simply the act of breathing. Now, serotonin overload is exactly why I have that rule about never using an untested strain in a ritual setting. Don't get me wrong, it can still sometimes sneak up on me, but since I discovered what actually caused it and what I need to do to negate it, the episodes happen far, far less often and are honestly more manageable when they do. Sorry, I had a little issue with my dog there. Another rule I have is that when using cannabis for spiritual purposes, that it be ritualized. I don't simply just smoke up like Cheech and Chong before casting my circles and have at it. I want to stress that I am in no way advocating that you should, without question, incorporate cannabis into your metaphysical practice. If it's something that doesn't resonate with you, then simply turn off this video because you won't need any of the other information which is about to follow. And that is perfectly okay. Again, we all follow different paths, and none of them are the one true way. However, if you already incorporate cannabis into your practice or have been considering it, I'll share my ceremony with you. Now, at the risk of wowing everybody with my amazing naming conventions, I call this one the cannabis ritual. Now, there's a lot of ways that cannabis can be introduced into your system. There's edibles, RSO oil, flower, vapes, dabs. I could go on and on. My dispensary even has cannabis suppositories, if that's your thing. Anyhow, this ritual, though, it utilizes bud due to symbolic purposes that I'll discuss here in a moment. There are also probably just as many ways of smoking cannabis as there are delivery methods. You got your bowls, steamrollers, hookahs, blunts, joints. Again, the list goes on and on. For ritual use, however, I prefer to use a water bong because it incorporates all four of the classical occult and alchemical elements in one method. We use fire to light the bud, which, being a plant, has a very strong connection to earth, of course. And then we utilize air to draw it up through the water and into our lungs. So there you have all four: fire, earth, air, and water. Again, this is just me. I like that symbolism. And if you have a different preferred method, it's all good. Anyhow, I begin by holding the bud itself in my dominant hand, closing my eyes, and allowing my breathing to settle into a deep and slow rhythm. Like the beginning stages of the Kabbalistic cross, I eventually visualize a pure and radiant light above my head, and once I can see it clearly, I hold the bud in my open palm and see the light coming down, envisioning it infusing into the flower itself. When I feel the time is right, I then break the bud up and pack the bong's bowl, working slowly and with focused intention. Once packed, I then lower my head until my nose is almost touching the packed bowl. Continuing my rhythmic breathing, I inhale its scent in through my nose, but when I exhale, I blow my breath gently into the bowl, visualizing my own personal energies seeping into the flower as well. Excuse me, I had a little tickle in my throat. Now, when I feel as though I've channeled as much of my own energy into it as I can, I then raise the bong above my head with both hands like this, and I picture divine light flowing down through the mouthpiece, down through the neck, into the water chamber, through the downstem, into the bowl. Basically, the entire apparatus becomes suffused with divine light. Then, still holding the bong aloft, I reverently say, I am humbly grateful for the blessings of this sacrament, of which I am about to receive. May it cleanse and purify me in all ways I may use it. Body. Here, when I say body, we lower the bong slowly until it's just slightly above head level. Mind. Here we lower again, this time in pausing in front of the third eye. And soul. And finally, we come to rest with the bong being held at chest level in front of the heart, and much like a prayer hands, I suppose you could call them. Now, after that, I light it and take the first hit. Now, rather than simply inhaling smoke, I see myself as breathing in a concentrated stream of that same light that the bong was just blessed with. I visualize the light descending down my windpipe, where it is held and allowed to flare within my diaphragm for a moment before rising back up. Now, when I exhale, I see myself breathing that light and energy back out into the universe in a continuous cycle. However, rather than immediately taking another hit, I usually continue my meditative breathing for a few moments, as this better allows me to monitor the level of the effects. Sometimes I repeat the mind, body, soul benediction while continuing to smoke, but once I've reached the desired level, I set the bong aside and move on to more standard work. Now, once more, for those in the back, I am not saying that you have to do any of this. In the end, it's all simply a matter of personal preference and what resonates most strongly with your path and your tradition. So, out of curiosity, what's your opinion on ritualized cannabis use? For, against, or like me, somewhere in the middle? Let me know in the comments. I really would love to hear. Likewise, if you found this video informative or helpful, I'd really appreciate you giving it a thumbs up and considering subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. This helps the work reach a greater audience and honestly allows me to continue creating videos on ceremonial magic, Kabbalah, and other topics in esotericism. Sorry, I don't know why my throat is so scratchy today. As far as channel news goes, I've finally completed the experiment where I've been testing 5 different methods of scrying and scoring them using a standardized rubric. Now I simply just have to compile all the data and film the episode itself, so that will be coming soon. Excuse me again. Additionally, I'm also pretty much done with pre-production and will soon begin filming my 11-video course on utilizing each individual sephira on the Tree of Life for magical purposes and workings. So that series should also be coming sooner rather than later. And if any of that sounds interesting to you, make sure to ring that notifications bell so you will be alerted whenever new content drops here on the Transformative Alchemist. Until then, I want to thank you from the very bottom of my heart for spending this time with me. It really does mean a lot to me, and I really do appreciate it. Until we meet again, may your path be guided by wisdom, your practice meaningful, and your journey lead you ever closer to the divine. And, of course, as always, walk in peace and light, my friends.